Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Ed Pacheco, who's running for the Democratic nomination in Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District. He served as state representative in Rhode Island House District 47 for a couple of terms. He was also chairman of the Rhode Island Democratic Party, and you may know him most recently in his role where he was the interim executive director of external affairs and communications for Rhode Island College. Mr. Pacheco, how are you today?
Ray, it's great to be with you this evening and excited to talk to you about this important race that we have coming up.
It's good to have you on. Starting with the first question here, you're now running for Congress in the 2022 Democratic primary. The incumbent, Jim Langevin, is retiring, so alongside yourself, a few other Democrats are throwing their hat to the race. Can you explain for those watching a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Congress?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Ray, for having me. I'm just thrilled to talk with voters all throughout the 2nd Congressional District about the importance of this upcoming election. First, let me say thank you to Congressman Langevin for his many years of service. 22 years as he concludes this current term is something to be recognized for, and certainly he has been a true public servant and advocate on behalf of Rhode Islanders, but in particular the 2nd Congressional District. So he will certainly should be thanked for his service and certainly the impact he has had, particularly on his alma mater at Rhode Island College over the years. When I decided to jump into this race, it actually reminded me of the time that I decided to run as a writing candidate for town council back in Burrville when I was a high school student. When I was growing up in Burrville, where I spent 30 years of my life, my community rallied around me during some of my darkest times. My family and I spent time on Section 8 and food stamps. We understood what it was to face the challenges that we faced, and we understood what working families were going through. And still to this day, my wife and I, with our 2 children, face those same challenges in many ways that many other families face with the pandemic and certainly navigating childcare and school, among other things. I decided then I wanted to jump into public service because I wanted to give back to the community I love so much, my friends, my family, my neighbors. I spent many of as you mentioned earlier, I spent many years in service to my state, both professionally and politically. I went on to serve as a school committee member, youngest at that time elected official in Rhode Island, and later as state member of the State General Assembly for Burrville Gloucester, where I had the distinction of fighting on behalf of my community for priorities such as education and civic engagement. Later on, I served as State Democratic Party chairperson, where I helped elect Democrats all throughout Rhode Island. And I stepped away from politics about 10 years ago when my wife and I were blessed to learn that we were going to have our second little one. And my family needed my attention then, certainly more than ever, and was the right decision because, as I tell everybody, it's health and family first. Fast forward, I've always maintained that sense of duty to my community, my neighbors, my friends, the folks that stood up for me when I needed someone to stand up for me. And today, many families throughout the district are facing many challenges and struggles that we find ourselves in. And I'm ready to stand up again on their behalf because we need a fighter in Washington. Someone understands what each and every Rhode Islander in the 2nd Congressional District is going through. And that when I get to Washington, if I can just make their lives just a little bit easier, that will be making a difference. And that's not a cliche for me. And I'll fight on their behalf each and every day that I'm in Washington.
In Congress, the dynamic is a little bit different than running a statewide or even for a state rep seat. There's a wide range of issues a congressperson could focus on. For example, our current Congressman Jim Langevin, he's focusing on strengthening the country's cybersecurity as well as advocating for people with disabilities. What are some key issues you plan to focus on if elected?
Yeah, priority number one for me is education, Ray. When I was growing up, my mother taught me, the importance of a good public education and, of course, the value of hard work. And I was fortunate to be able to pick myself up by my bootstraps because of, as I mentioned a moment ago, my community and certainly the support that I had from my mother as a single parent. Not everyone has bootstraps to be picked up by. And I want to make sure that they have access to a good education, no matter where they are, what zip code they hail from, because that fundamentally is one of the most important investments that we can make in Americans and certainly Rhode Islanders. Of course, specifically, one of the things I want to focus on is universal pre-K. I think that is a key investment for families. And fortunately, right here in Rhode Island, our state leaders are already focused on that very issue. And I hope to join them in not only making that possible here in Rhode Island, but throughout the entire United States. And of course, as I mentioned in my analysis speech, things such as loan forgiveness for students that are graduating from college that facing financial debt, and a number of other aspects with respect to increasing opportunity to 4-year and 2-year college programs and workforce development. Additionally, I think one of the things that we certainly have to look at, want to credit President Mark Palange of University of Rhode Island for discussing the importance of the blue and green economy. The Ocean State is just that. We have an opportunity to invest in everything from tourism and recreation to certainly good jobs at places such as Quonset and other parts of our state that certainly we have seen incredible development. There's going to be a number of issues that the next congressperson from the 2nd District faces. But I think most importantly, it's helping Rhode Islanders with the challenges that they face, such as inflation, increases in prices at the gas pump and groceries. Whatever we can do to help limit those costs from increasing, hopefully decrease them, and help Rhode Islanders have the ability to cost of living and focus on putting food on the table, a roof over their head, and taking care of their families. That's got to be my number one priority.
Looking at some of the current issues facing the country, HR 1 is one of the many pieces of legislation that the Democratic Party was hoping to pass before this election takes place. Currently, it's in limbo in the Senate. The bill does a number of things like end gerrymandering, making mail-in voting more accessible, the whole 9 yards. Say in January 2023, if the bill hasn't passed and is reintroduced, how would you vote on it?
So I would vote to support any effort to protect Americans' right to vote. Rhode Island's doing it right. Over the last few years, we had the ability to have mail ballots, early voting, certainly at town halls throughout the state. And I want to credit Secretary Nellie Gorbea for the work that she has done. And of course, advocates in Rhode Island are pushing for that it's a permanent, make sure that's permanent going forward for Rhode Islanders. But that has to be made available for Americans all throughout the country. And I would support any effort to protect Americans' right to vote.
Voter ID laws also come up in the dialogue of election laws, and you had mentioned comparing it to Rhode Island. Rhode Island, we have a voter ID law. Public polling shows it's favorable to an extent as long as it's not making voting difficult, but at least requiring some form of ID. Where do you stand on voter ID laws?
Yeah, so I think it's important that if we're going to have voter ID laws in place, that we have to make IDs available to each and every resident throughout the state. And of course, that needs to be the case for throughout the country. So in the case of Rhode Island, certainly, again, we have voter ID, but in this instance, we've made every effort to make free IDs available to those that need them. And certainly that would be an effort that I would support on a national level as well.
So do you think Rhode Island's doing it right? Because there are calls by some in the progressive wing of the party to repeal the voter ID law, like Senator Mack of District 6, for example.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I voted against voter ID in Rhode Island when I was in the State General Assembly. And, if there is an opportunity to debate this issue, I think it's warranted debate. But again, I think as long as we have voter ID, it's incredibly important that we make IDs accessible to each and every person so they have the ability to exercise their right to vote.
Going back to some of the issues you had mentioned that you're going to focus on if elected to Congress, it also plays into another national issue the Democrats are focusing on, which is passing President Biden's Build Back Better plan. It's a bill that does a number of things and has a number of proposals. Some of them you mentioned, like universal pre-K. Another piece in that is capping insulin prices, paid family leave, etc. The bill may be narrowed down to whatever Senator Joe Manchin wants, because that's how the dynamic of the Senate is right now, since it's 50-50 and he's a key vote. This is kind of a loaded question, but what parts of the Build Back Better plan do you agree or disagree with?
Well, as you mentioned, the Build Back Better plan is holistically comprehensive. There are a number of different initiatives within that legislation. What I will say is this. If elected to Congress, I'll be voting for that plan because for Rhode Islanders in the 2nd District, they're hurting and they need support. And that legislation represents a multitude of ways, not the least of which, as I mentioned, one of my top priorities is universal pre-K and, of course, extension of the child tax credit that I think has been instrumental in helping Rhode Islanders and Americans get back on their feet.
When talking about the Build Back Better plan, the dialogue then shifts to the Senate filibuster, because we're seeing with bills like that and HR1 that was previously mentioned. Right now, they're stalled in the Senate. It's 50-50. You need 60 to pass the cloture in order for the bill to be voted on. Then it leads to calls by some Democrats to abolish the Senate filibuster. Are you in? I know it's for the Senate and you're running for the House, but some House Democrats have taken a stance on it. Like Congressman Cicilline, for example, he wants the filibuster gone. Are you in favor of or opposed to getting rid of the Senate filibuster?
Yeah, listen, I'm running for the United States Congress, and certainly I want to support our senators and the good work that they're doing. We're fortunate in Rhode Island to have an incredible federal delegation. But I would support any and all efforts to make sure that we don't stall Americans' progress and making sure that we have an agenda that is going to support everyday Americans.
So if getting rid of the filibuster would be that option, would you be supportive of it?
I think it's something that we should certainly consider if we're going to impede progress on behalf of the American people.
Recently, you were known for your role at RIC that I had mentioned at the top of the interview. It's an amazing and underrated institution. I'm totally not saying that because I currently attend there, but it is. It's seen some tough challenges during COVID. Enrollment is down. The talk of whether things are going to be in person for instruction or not. It's been a bumpy road. Last semester was in person. We had the delayed start for this one. I'm trying to find the best way to ask this because I don't want to ask it just for RIC. I'll just ask it for in general for colleges like RIC. As Congressman for Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District, is there any specific legislation that you personally would introduce to help institutions like RIC?
Well, I could tell you, as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, Ray, that one of the first things I would look at is loan forgiveness for younger generations in particular that are facing an incredible amount of debt that really is causing a vicious cycle from their ability to either get a job or finish their degree and completely. And it's not a great place to be in, right? If you fail as an individual, it impacts our community. When you succeed, our community succeeds. And so we need to invest in our future workforce, our future leaders, the folks that we rely on. Our greatest resource is the very people that graduate from our secondary high schools and certainly go on to 2-year and 4-year degrees and workforce training programs. So we have to help them as much as we possibly can. Secondarily, no less important is looking at the Pell grant and the possibility of expanding that opportunity for students. It's something that I think not only deserves to be revisited, but we've advocated for over the last few years on behalf of the state of Rhode Island as a whole. And I would certainly push for that when I get to Congress.
Now looking at the dynamic of how the House leadership is going to look like, it's up in the air because 2022 is an interesting election cycle to say the least. Due to historical precedent, there is the discussion that the House may flip to Republican control. And even recently, there was a discussion on who may be the House Minority Leader. I've heard a couple names aside from Speaker Pelosi, like Congressman Hakeem Jeffries from New York, even our other Congressman David Cicilline. Say January 2023 comes, you're elected to Congress. Who would you vote for either the Speaker or Minority Leader in either situation?
Sure. So I can't forecast who is or is not going to be running for leadership positions. What I can say is this. One of the most important things that's going to be played out over the course of this election is whether or not we send a Democrat or a Republican to Washington, D.C. in January. And I think that's the most critical discussion that we could have, because I believe we need to keep the 2nd Congressional District Democratic to make sure that we support a Democratic leadership and obviously when and if I am fortunate enough to be elected the next congressperson from the 2nd District, I'll cast my ballot for a Democratic leadership.
Speaker Pelosi did announce recently she's running for re-election. She's most likely going to win her election. So would you vote for Speaker Pelosi in January 2023?
If Speaker Pelosi is up for consideration, it's certainly she's one of the smartest politicians that has ever served in Washington, D.C. She's been a stalwart on behalf of the Democratic Party and certainly would be deserving of a vote. So I would certainly support her. And as I mentioned, but we don't know what that's going to look like, obviously, come November and certainly January. So I will cast my ballot for a Democratic leadership, but certainly if Nancy Pelosi is under consideration, would vote to support her. These
next two are shorter form questions, focusing on a couple other key national issues that were talked about frequently at the beginning of the session, has died down a little bit, but still could be brought up in the next session. Are you in favor of or opposed to statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico?
Oh, I support statehood for both DC and Puerto Rico.
This next one's on the Supreme Court. To my understanding, to add more seats to that, it's just a simple piece of legislation to pass because there's no set number of judges that needs to be there. We're just going off the precedent of 9. And there was even legislation introduced by Congressman Nadler and a few other congresspeople. If legislation to add more Supreme Court seats makes its way to the House floor and you're able to vote on that bill, how would you vote for it?
It's something I would certainly take into consideration. I have not had an opportunity to look at that closely. As you know, I just announced my candidacy this past week. I would be in favor of the opportunity to debate that issue, but it's not a particular issue that I'm ready to take a position on at this time.
So undecided currently?
Undecided.
Shifting to the non-political topics for the end, I always like to end with non-political topics. For starters, I know you are a big wrestling fan like myself, and many I'm starting to realize now are more wrestling fans, and especially on Rhode Island Twitter. There was like a whole thread that Travis Escobar put recently, and we had like everybody from Rhode Island talking about that. Just for starters, are you an AEW or WWE guy, and why?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I'm a WWE guy, and I've been a big fan of the WWE. Before that, the WF for many years. I remember the rivalry between ECW and WCW, and of course, WWE. There's just so many historic moments over the course of the last 20, 30 years that I can remember to my childhood. It's hard not to be a fan of the WWE.
Do you have a favorite wrestler or match of all time?
Oh, it had to be Bret Hart versus Yokozuna, but I was devastated because I thought for sure Bret Hart was going to win, and as you know, he didn't. And Hulk Hogan came in at the last minute and won the belt. So I think Bret Hart was robbed, but it was still a fun match to watch nonetheless.
The Rumble is actually, as we're recording, for reference to those watching, we're recording this on Saturday, January 29th. The Rumble pay-per-view has started. I hope the Rumble match is not itself with the 30-man Rumble or 30-man Woman Rumble. I hope they haven't started yet. Do you have any last-second predictions for either of those two?
Honestly, I don't even know who's in the Rumble right now. But I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that Ricochet and a few other guys are in this year's Royal Rumble. I like the underdogs. I'm a big favor of the underdogs. So I would hope that somebody like Ricochet would pull it off if he was in it this year. Seth Rollins would be fun to watch if he was certainly in the Royal Rumble. I know him and I think last I checked, him and Roman Reigns were duking it out for the championship. And it's always fun to see Brock Lesnar back in the thick of things too. So, but I like Ricochet. I'm a big Ricochet fan. I just think I like that underdog stance, and hopefully he's in the Rumble tonight.
If only they booked him correctly these past couple of years. My final question I ask everyone here on the show to keep tradition is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Oh, well, I have to say our incredible oceanfront and beaches. I spent years when I was a kid with my grandparents down at Newport Beach, walking with my grandmother and chasing hermit crabs in the rocks. There's nothing that brings a smile to my face more than thinking about our beaches and our oceans. Absolutely stunning, and I love them.
They absolutely are. Mr. Pacheco, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thanks, Ray. It's been a pleasure. Great to see you, and good luck shoveling when you have this chance.
Thank you. I'll try my best. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. Please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it, and with the Anchor TV Rick channel. If you want to see the political profiles version, that all can be seen on anchorweb.org. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.